Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Aloud. Today we're reading aloud another amazing storybook for children, Peter Pan. Let's start. Here is a story of Peter Pan, the boy who never wants to grow up. He comes from Never Never Land, an island which children sometimes visit in their dreams. The most magical thing about Peter Pan is he can fly. This favorite of all stories begins in a large house in London. It's the home of Mr. and Mrs. Darling, parents of Wendy, Michael, and John. Now, these three children have a very unusual nurse. A big Newfoundland dog called Nana. Why, you might ask, did Peter Pan never visit the home of the Darlings? Sometimes when he was feeling lonely, he would fly up to their nursery room window and peep inside, just to be part of a human family again and remember what it was like to have a mother. If the nursery window was left open and Nana the dog was nowhere about, Peter would fly right into the nursery. Wendy often caught a glimpse of the strange boy, but she thought she was just dreaming. Now one night, Mrs. Darling was sitting sewing while her children slept. Peter flew straight in through the window. He didn't notice that Nana was in the nursery. The dog sprang up and growled and snarled at the boy. As he tried to escape, his shadow caught on the window, and Peter had to leave it behind. Rather startled, Mrs. Darling picked it up and put it in a drawer. The very next night, when the Darlings were asleep, a tiny bright light flew in through the window and began to dart about. It was Tinker Bell, a tiny fairy who went everywhere with Peter Pan. She was searching for Peter's shadow. She looked in all the cupboards, all the drawers. She even delved inside a jug. Eventually, she found the right place, just as Peter flew in through the window. He grabbed his shadow and shut the drawer tight, trapping poor Tinker Bell inside. Aww. He searched around, trying to find something that would stick his shadow back on. All this noise woke up Wendy. She knew what to do right away. She fetched her workbox and very neatly stitched the shadow on again. When Wendy offered Peter a kiss, he looked puzzled. He had never had a kiss before. And held his hand out for a present. So Wendy gave him a silver thimble instead. In return, Peter gave her one of his acorn-shaped buttons, which Wendy hung on a chain around her neck. As Peter sat in the nursery, he told Wendy all about Never Never Land, where he lived with the lost boys and the fairies. He explained to her how a fairy dies every time a human child says, "I do not believe in fairies." It was then that Peter remembered Tinker Bell still trapped in the drawer. He let her out, and she was furious. She buzzed round Wendy and tried to pull her hair. Perhaps she was jealous of Peter's new friend. All this noise woke up John and Michael. They listened spellbound when Peter told them about his fierce fights with the pirates on Never Never Land. And of course, they wanted to go. So it was agreed that they should first learn to fly and go away with Peter Pan that very night. After a great deal of practice, they were ready, not a moment too soon, for running up the stairs came Mr. and Mrs. Darling. One by one, the children flew out of the nursery window, leaving their poor parents behind. Soon they were soaring through the night sky with the lights of London far below them. On and on they went. "Second star to the right, and on until morning," cried Peter Pan as he sped ahead. At long last, as the sun rose, they glimpsed Never Never Land beneath them. It was just as Peter had said. Anchored near the island was a pirate ship, the Jolly Roger, with its evil captain Hook. The pirate chief hated Pan because he had cut off his hand and thrown it to a crocodile who longed to eat the rest of him. Luckily, the crocodile had swallowed the clock, and everyone could hear him coming with his loud tick, tick, tick. As they flew over the island, Wendy and the boys saw an Indian tribe round the wigwams. These were the Indians who were always on the trail of the evil pirates. Suddenly, there came the most enormous bang. Boom! The pirate ship below had fired its cannon. The blast scattered the children in different directions. Tinker Bell hated Wendy so much that she pretended to guide her to safety. Instead, she led her into terrible danger. Below on the island, Peter's lost boys were looking up into the sky. They saw Wendy and thought she was a bird. "Peter wants you to shoot Wendy," cried Tinker Bell. So the biggest boy took his bow and arrow and shot Wendy through the heart. She fluttered down from the sky and landed on the ground. Aww. Luckily, the arrow had struck into the acorn-shaped button Peter had given her, and she was quite unharmed. Peter was so angry, he banished the wicked Tinker Bell for a whole week, which made her hate Wendy even more. Eagerly, the lost boys led Wendy to their secret home underground. To reach it, they squeezed through holes in certain tree trunks, then slid down into a huge cave below. Wendy, John, and Michael lived with the lost boys for weeks. Wendy did their washing, cooked all their meals, and told them stories like a real mother. She told such lovely stories about her home and her mother that John and Michael wanted to go back home. The lost boys begged to be allowed to go there too. This hurt Peter's feelings. He was afraid to leave Never Never Land for good in case he grew up. However, he told Tinker Bell to guide them back home over the sea. Then sadly he shook hands with Wendy. promise you will drink your glass of medicine every night when I'm gone." The words were hardly out of her mouth when the air was filled with a blood-curdling scream. The pirates were attacking the Indians in the forest above the lost boy's home. It was a bitter battle, and sad to say, the pirates won. The lost boys, however, thought their friends the Indians had won. So one by one, they climbed out of their secret cave. Oh no! The evil pirates were waiting. They pounced on them and captured them, every single one of them. The evil pirates were waiting. They pounced on them and captured them all. They tied everyone up and took them aboard the Jolly Roger. But Captain Hook stayed behind. He was out to kill Peter Pan. He peered down all the hollow trees until he spied Peter asleep in the secret cave below. He squeezed his arm down the tree trunk and slipped 5 drops of deadly poison into Peter's medicine glass that Wendy had left. Later that night, Peter was woken up by Tinker Bell, who told him of Wendy's capture. Quickly, Peter jumped out of bed to take his medicine as he had promised. Tinker Bell knew it was deadly poison, as she had heard Captain Hook talking about it in the forest. Bravely, she flew up to the glass and drank the medicine herself. As she fell to the floor, the tiny fairy light was almost gone. She was going to die. Peter stood up and shouted in his loudest voice, "If you believe in fairies, clap your hands!" It seemed as if all the air was full of noise, made by all the children in the world. The children were clapping. Tinker Bell was saved. The evil Captain Hook had tied Wendy to the mast and was about to make the lost boys walk the plank. All at once he stopped. He fell on the deck in fear. Tick, tick, tick. He thought it was a crocodile. In fact, it was Peter Pan imitating it. When Hook was hiding in fear, Peter slipped on board and freed everyone. Then began the terrible fight with Hook. They clashed swords up and down the deck of the ship until at last Hook overbalanced and fell into the sea, where his friend the crocodile was waiting. What joy it was for Wendy, John and Michael to return home. How happy the darlings were to see their children home safely. It is said that the darlings adopted all the lost boys and that Wendy goes back to Never Never Land every year to see Peter Pan. Perhaps you may go there one day too. I'm sure you enjoyed the story. Remember to subscribe for more interesting books. We'll read aloud together. See you next time. Bye-bye. Au revoir. Adios. Arrivederci. Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel, Oluwaseyi Alade Art. Here we'll be reading aloud this lovely story, The Frog Prince. Once upon a time, There lived a king who had several beautiful daughters, but the youngest was even more beautiful than the rest. Near the castle of the king was a large and gloomy forest. Just a short walk into the trees was a small clearing. At the far side stood an old lime tree, and beneath its branches splashed a fountain in the middle of a dark, deep pool. Whenever it was very hot, the king's youngest daughter would run off into this wood and sit by the pool, throwing her golden ball into the air. This was her favorite pastime. One afternoon, when the princess threw the ball high up in the air, she didn't catch it. It slipped through her fingers onto the grass. Then it rolled past her into the fountain and disappeared beneath the water. Oh no. The princess peered into the pool, but her precious golden ball was gone. Quickly, she plunged her arms into the pool as far as she could reach, but she could feel nothing except weeds and water lilies. Some people said the pool was so deep it had no bottom. So when the princess realized her golden ball was gone forever, she began to cry. "Come back to me this minute, golden ball. Come back," sobbed the princess, staring hard into the water. Now, as a rule, princesses are used to getting their own way. So after her golden ball didn't magically pop out the water, she began to howl even louder. Dear, oh dear. First she stamped her feet, and then she threw herself down on the grass in temper. The princess was making so much noise that she didn't notice a big green frog stick its head out of the water and jump onto the grass beside her. "Don't cry, beautiful princess," the frog croaked. "I saw your golden ball fall into the water, and it would be my pleasure to dive down and get it for you, if you will give me something in return." At this, the princess cheered up. "I will gladly give you my jewels and pearls and even my golden crown if you will bring back my golden ball." It's true to say that promises should never be made in a hurry, even by princesses, because a promise is a thing that must be kept, especially to frogs. The frog hopped nearer to the princess. "Bells and jewels and golden crowns are no use to me," he went on. "But if you love me and be my friend, if you let me eat from your golden plate, drink from your golden cup, and sleep on your golden bed, I will dive down and fetch your ball." So eager was the princess to see her golden ball once more, as she didn't listen too carefully to what the frog had to say. "I promise you all you ask, if only you will bring back my ball." Quick as a flash, the frog jumped into the pool, then bobbed out again with the ball in his mouth. Straight away, the king's daughter snatched her ball and ran back to the castle. "Take me with you," cried the frog. "I cannot run as fast as you and shall be left behind." But the princess didn't care about her promise. and soon forgot all about the frog. Later that day, when the princess was sitting at the table, something was heard coming up the marble stairs. Splish, splash, splish, splash, splish, splash, splish, splash. The sound came nearer and nearer, and the voice cried, "Let me in, youngest daughter of the king." The princess jumped up to see who had called her. Now, when she caught sight of the frog, she turned very pale. "What does a frog want with you?" demanded the king, looking rather surprised. The princess hung her head. "When I was sitting playing by the fountain, my golden ball fell into the water. This frog fetched it back for me because I cried so much." The princess started to cry again. "I promised to love him and let him eat from my golden plate, drink from my golden cup, and sleep on my golden bed." The king looked at the frog and thought for a while before he spoke. "Then you must keep your promise, my daughter." The princess knew she must obey, so she beckoned the frog to come inside. The frog hopped in after her and jumped into her chair and straight onto the table. "Now push your golden plate near me," said the frog, "so that we may eat together." As she did so, the frog leapt onto her plate and gobbled up all her dinner, which is just as well because the princess didn't feel much like eating. Next, the frog drank from her little golden cup until it was quite empty. Somehow, the princess didn't feel thirsty either. After the frog had finished, he took one great leap and landed on the princess's knee. "Go away, you ugly cow frog!" she screamed. "Ah! I will never let you sleep on my lovely clean bed." This made the king very angry. "This frog helped you when you needed it. Now you must keep your promise to him." "I am very tired after that wonderful meal," the frog said. "And you did promise that I could go to sleep on your golden bed." Very unwillingly, the princess picked up the frog and carried him upstairs to her room. When the frog hopped into the middle of her golden bed, it was just too much for the princess. She tugged hard at the coverlet and tipped the poor frog onto the floor. Boom! As he fell, he was changed into a handsome prince. A spell had been cast on him by an evil witch, and only the princess had the power to break it. The princess was speechless. She felt very sorry indeed that she had been so unkind to the frog. After a while, the handsome prince and princess got married, and I'm sure lived happily ever after. L'amour. Subscribe to my channel for more amazing books we'll read aloud together. See you next time. Bye-bye. Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel, Aloud Art. Today is another lovely day to read another lovely book aloud. The title of this book is The Little Tin Soldier. Once upon a time, there lived an old toy maker. Folk came from miles around to gaze in his shop window full of toys, and sometimes they would call in and buy presents for their children. One day, the old toy maker melted down a very large tin spoon. Carefully, he poured the hot metal into some special molds to make a set of tin soldiers. He filled up 20 of the molds, but on the 21st, he ran out of tin. So when the soldiers were turned out, 20 were exactly alike, but the very last soldier had one leg missing. With great skill, the old toy maker painted the soldiers. He gave them red tunics and blue trousers and finished off their hats with gold braid. They looked splendid, standing stiffly to attention and saluting. Even the tin soldier with one leg stood up just as straight as the others, looking every bit as brave and dashing. The old man was pleased with his work, and it wasn't too long before someone saw the 21 tin soldiers in his window and bought them. The box full of soldiers were given to a small boy for his birthday, and when he lifted the lid, he was thrilled to bits. "Tin soldiers!" he gasps. "Just what I've always wanted." The boy stood all his soldiers in a row in his nursery without even noticing that one of them had only one leg. The little tin soldier gazed around him at the other toys. The floor below was littered with teddy bears, clockwork toys, bricks and dolls, and a toy fort for the tin soldiers. But the best toy was a splendid cardboard castle. It had tall pillars either side of the door, and more windows than a tin soldier could count. On the steps of the cardboard castle stood a graceful ballerina doll. She was balanced perfectly on one leg with the other stretched behind her. It looked as if she had only one leg. "What a perfect wife she would make for me," sighed the little tin soldier as he gazed into her eyes. But the ballerina doll didn't even blink. She just stood there on one leg. "What a perfect wife she would make for me," sighed the little tin soldier as he gazed into her eyes. But the ballerina doll didn't even blink. She just stood there on one leg, staring back at the tin soldier. "I know that she is far too good for me," the tin soldier thought to himself. "But I must be very brave and look into her eyes until she speaks to me." "What a perfect wife she would make for me," sighed the little tin soldier as he gazed into her eyes. But the ballerina doll didn't even blink. She just stood there on one leg, standing back at the tin soldier. "I know that she is far too good for me," the tin soldier thought to himself. "But I must be very brave and look into her eyes until she speaks to me." At night, when all the people in the house were asleep, the toys came out to play. The dolls and teddies danced and played games. The clockwork mice held races against the cars. Even the tin soldiers, who were supposed to be on guard, joined in the fun. But the little tin soldier and the ballerina doll just remained perfectly still and stared at each other. Suddenly one night, the clock in the nursery struck midnight. The jack in the box flew open, and a bad-tempered goblin flew out. He pointed a honey finger at the tin soldier. "Stop staring at the ballerina, or it will be the worse for you," he snarled. Although the goblin gave the tin soldier a terrible fright, he bravely stood to attention and continued to gaze at the ballerina doll. Very early next morning, the little boy came to his nursery to play with his soldiers. He lined them up in a row on the window ledge. They ran off to have its breakfast. Without any warning, the little tin soldier was whisked through the air. He fell out of the open window and down into the street below. Who knows how it happened? It may have been just a gust of wind, or even that nasty goblin. No one will ever know. As the poor tin soldier lay upside down in the gutter, it began to pour with rain. Two little boys came running past, and one of them spotted the tin soldier. The other had made a paper boat, so they stood the soldier in the front and carefully launched it into the gutter. Swiftly, the boat sped along the water until it was swept into a drain beneath the street. The brave tin soldier showed no fear, even when the boat sailed out of the drain and into the river. Then it began to sink. All too soon, the water was up to the soldier's chest. The paper boat became so soggy that it just fell to pieces, and the tin soldier sank beneath the surface. Oh, what a brave tin soldier he was. He showed no fear at all, even when the biggest fish in the river swallowed him up. It was terribly dark and gloomy inside the fish's stomach. The brave tin soldier kept his spirits up by thinking about the lovely ballerina and how he must see her once more. One day, the great fish was caught with a rod and line and ended up on a kitchen table. As the cook cut open the fish with her very sharp knife, the brave tin soldier fell out onto the table. The startled cook picked him up and took him up to the nursery. Now it was the tin soldier's turn to be surprised. He found himself in the very same nursery with the very same toys, the dolls, the teddies, all his soldier friends, and best of all, his lovely ballerina doll. But neither of them said a word. That night, when all was quiet, the brave tin soldier slowly made his way to the cardboard castle. He was going to beg the ballerina to come away with him. As he reached her side, the jack-in-the-box lid flew open, and the goblin pushed the brave tin soldier backwards. How dreadful! The poor tin soldier fell straight into the fire. Then something very strange happened. The nursery door opened, and the sudden draught blew the ballerina doll into the arms of the tin soldier. The fire flared up, and both melted away together in the flames. Next morning, when the fire had cooled, the maid came to clear out the ashes. All she found was a little piece of tin in the shape of a heart. Oh, the end. Subscribe to my channel for more amazing books we'll read aloud together. See you next time. Bye-bye. Hello everyone. Welcome to my channel, Aloud Art. Today we're reading aloud Gulliver's Travels. Let's begin. This is the story of Lemuel Gulliver, a man who lived about 250 years ago. He studied very hard, and after many years, he became a doctor. He longed to travel and loved the sea. So he became a doctor on board a sailing ship. One day, he set off on a long voyage to the South Seas on a ship called the Antelope. And here begins one of the strangest adventure stories ever told. All went well on the Antelope for the first few weeks. Then suddenly one night, a great storm sprang up. The ship hit a rock and was wrecked. Although the sea was rough and the waves high, Gulliver was such a strong swimmer that he managed to reach the shore. Completely exhausted, he dragged himself up the beach as far away from the sea as possible. He lay down on the first grassy bank he found and fell into a deep sleep. At daybreak, when he opened his eyes, he tried to sit up and look around. But he was tied to the ground. He couldn't move his arms or legs or even lift his head. Then Gulliver felt something alive running up his legs and across his chest, like a crowd of mice or several beetles perhaps. All at once, Gulliver let out a great roar of surprise, for standing on his chest were at least 40 men, each about 6 inches high. Gulliver's great roar startled the little men. Quickly, they slid down to the floor below, where great crowds of tiny people were assembled. As Gulliver tried to turn his head to look, the strings that bound his arms snapped down. This frightened the little people so much that they shot hundreds of their sharp arrows into his face. Although this hurt quite a bit, Gulliver decided to lie still and not to frighten the little people again. After a while, when they had walked all over Gulliver, they became quite brave and tried to talk to him. But the little folk spoke a different language, so Gulliver couldn't understand a single word. Somehow, their tiny emperor realized that the giant man they had captured must be very hungry by now. So he gave orders that a tall wooden platform be built to reach Gulliver's mouth. After a while, several cartloads of food and wine arrived, and hundreds of the tiny men climbed up the platform with baskets of bread and meat. The hungry Gulliver drank a whole barrel of their wine in one gulp and ate a basket full of loaves in one bite. The Lilliputians, for that is what the little people were called, kept bringing more and more until Gulliver was so full up he fell fast asleep. The little people seemed to have lost all fear of the gigantic Gulliver. So while he slept, thousands of them set to work. 500 carpenters made a platform on wheels, and 900 men hoisted the sleeping Gulliver onto it. Then with 500 guards either side, and 1,500 horses pulling hard, they began to move him towards their capital city. It took a whole day and night to reach their destination. At last, the procession came to a halt outside a large church, which was to be Gulliver's house, although it seemed as small as a dog kennel to him. The tiny emperor of Lilliput did not intend to set Gulliver free altogether. He ordered all his blacksmiths to make a thick chain and padlock it onto Gulliver's leg so he could move around but not very far. News soon spread of the giant the emperor had captured. People flocked in from all over the land of Lilliput until the city was jammed with the little folk. 600 of them were chosen to look after Gulliver, and 400 tailors were kept busy making him new clothes. 6 of Lilliput's finest scholars were sent to teach him their language. At last the emperor could understand. Gulliver when he asked to be set free. He finally agreed on one condition. Gulliver must empty his pockets of anything that could be dangerous to Lilliput. Out came a knife, a comb, and a razor. The little people were fascinated. Then came his handkerchief, which to them looked like a carpet. His snuff box seemed like a huge chest of gunpowder. His watch made more noise than a watermill, and they thought that his purse was a fishing net. Finally, Gulliver took out his pistol and fired it into the air. So great was the noise, thousands of the little people fell flat on their backs with shock. Only the emperor stood his ground. For a man only 6 inches high, he was very brave. But even the brave emperor feared something. And one day he came to ask Gulliver's help. On the nearby island of Blefusco lived people called the Big Indians. Their fleet of 50 ships had just set sail to invade Lilliput. What a shock to the poor Big Indian sailors got. What a shock the poor Big Indian sailors got when Gulliver waded out to sea, roped all their ships together, and dragged them back to Lilliput. It didn't take Gulliver very long to realize that the Emperor of Lilliput was only using him to fight his battle for him, and that the Big Indians were not a wicked people at all. So Gulliver made up his mind to go over to their island and live with them. He took a large warship from Lilliput, loaded it up with his clothes so they wouldn't get wet, then towed it behind him to their island of Blefusco. He was most kindly received by the little folk, but all Gulliver really wanted was to get back to England. Quite by chance, as Gulliver was walking on the top of the cliff, he saw something floating in the sea. He could hardly believe his eyes. It was a full-size rowing boat floating upside down. Straight away, the Emperor of the Big Indians sent every ship in his fleet out to sea to tow it back to shore. It took 2,000 men to turn the boat right side up and then begin to repair it. 500 people stitched day and night to make the sails. Everyone on the island worked hard until the boat was ready. Gulliver took on board several tiny live sheep and cows to take back home. Then sadly came the time to say farewell. After only 2 days at sea, Gulliver was picked up by a sailing ship heading for England. When he told his strange story, the captain could hardly believe it until he saw the tiny cows and sheep which Gulliver placed on a table in front of him. At last, Gulliver returned home. People were delighted to welcome him back and never tired of hearing his strange story. The end. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like and share. And I'll see you next time with another amazing story we read aloud together. Bye!